kita akan menyelenggarakan kuliah umum guest lecture, menghadirkan salah satu lawyer senior yang saat ini menjadi salah satu lawyer yang ada di Maqdir Ismail and Partners. Maqdir Ismail and Partners, Pak ini salah satu managing director-nya itu adalah Pak Maqdir Ismail yang kebetulan juga alumni dari Fakultas Hukum Universitas Islam Indonesia. Dan hari ini Pak akan presentasi khususnya mengenai hukum investasi yang ada di Jerman dan sebagai pengantar dan semoga mahasiswa bisa mendapatkan ilmu komparatif bagaimana praktek dan juga ilmu hukum investasi yang ada di Jerman. Dan insya Allah acara pagi hari ini akan dipandu oleh Pak Moderator, Bapak Luki Suryo Wicaksono, SH MKN, dan persilahkan kepada beliau langsung untuk memandu jalannya acara hingga pukul 12 siang. Dan saya mohon kepada mahasiswa untuk fokus mengikuti kuliah dan saya berharap semua perangkat elektronik tidak ada di meja, tidak digunakan selama jalannya kuliah umum. Sehingga kita bisa fokus dan silakan kalau misalnya ada yang mau mencatat. Saya persilahkan Pak Luki untuk memandu kegiatan kita hari ini.
Oke, selamat pagi semuanya. Pagi ya, hari ini kita kedatangan tamu spesial. We have the special guest, ya, Mr. Philipp Kersting. Ya, he is coming from Germany. Beliau berasal dari Jerman, ya, dan punya segudang pengalaman. Ya, punya banyak sekali pengalaman. Because if I read his curriculum vitae, he start his career as a lawyer from 2001. Ya. No, 2009. Yeah, I'm still in the undergraduate program at that time. Yeah, so it is a long experience. Ya, a lot of experience. Ya, jadi banyak sekali pengalaman dari Mr. Phillips yang nanti sebagian kecil nanti akan di-share khususnya nanti berkaitan dengan investasi ya atau hukum investasi yang itu diberlakukan di Jerman. Ya, jadi nanti Mr. Philip akan menjelaskan ya mengenai bagaimana hukum investasi di Jerman. Ya, karena ini sebagian teman-teman ada yang mengambil kelas hukum investasi. Ya, jadi kita kemarin sudah belajar tentang trade related investment measures ya dan ketentuan-ketentuan internasional berkaitan dengan investasi. Ini nanti bisa langsung tanya ke ahlinya, to the expert. Yeah, so I think because we have the time around 85 minutes, yeah, until 12 o'clock. So maybe I give you the time around 60 minutes to give the presentations, and then the rest we will make the question and answer session. Yeah, yeah, okay. Saya akan bacakan CV dari Mr. Phillips ya. Mr. Phillips ini sudah memulai karirnya ya sebagai legal assistant in 2001 in Warner Capel Music. Kemudian juga beliau pernah menjadi associate di Hamburg, Germany di Better Menkin. Ya, it is correct spelling. And also as a partner ya in that same firm. And also in 2014, he joining the Luther in Singapore. Yeah, he is as the associate. And then in 2015 is moved to the Malaysia, ya ke Luther Malaysia. Kemudian di 2017 in 2017 he moved to the Luther firm in Singapore office, ya, and also Indonesia, joining with the office kantor Pak Maqdir Ismail, ya, one of our alumni. Yeah, so he has a lot of experience related to the general corporate lawyer about the investment. So to make the time is more efficient, I will give this session to Mr. Phillips to start the presentations. Okay, the time is yours.
Yeah. Hello, hi. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for having me here. Yeah, well, I have the pleasure of introducing German investment law to you. I think it's a nice topic. I'll keep it very superficial and on the business side this time, because I think it's no use to deep dive into the laws. But I think it's a nice topic to maybe later have a discussion on how it's different from the way Indonesia approaches investment law. As you can see, we've structured it a little bit. First, I get into why foreign investment is important, also for an industrial nation like Germany, how usually jurisdictions attract investors, and then some issues or some points on the European single market, because I was not sure how familiar you are with that. It's a very unique construct. And then some of the legal barriers, or let's say the legal risk mitigators that Germany has installed in order to protect themselves from potential hostile foreign investment. The significance of foreign investment in Germany is rather high. It's a crucial part of Germany's economy. If you see that 3.5 million German employees work for companies that are foreign owned, and we have 16,817 companies that we consider foreign owned. That's rather significant. And here we already have one of the key differences in perspective. From a German perspective, foreign direct investment into the country stimulates export, whereas Indonesia has a rather opposite role, because direct investment also always means imports, and imports are viewed as potentially hostile to the Indonesian economy. We have an agency that is active in almost every country of those, called GTAI, Germany Trade and Invest. Here in Indonesia, it's in Jakarta. It's in the same building as the German-Indonesian Bilateral Commercial Chamber of Commerce. There's one German colleague working there with Indonesian staff to basically promote to Indonesian companies why they should come to Germany to invest there. And as the name suggests, it doesn't only promote investment into Germany, but also trade with Germany. Just so you can see where foreign direct investments into Germany comes from, I have to excuse myself for using very late numbers, but it's hard to get definite numbers fast. So these numbers are from 2019, but you can rest assured that generally the ratio is the same. Of course, after 2019, 2020 and onwards, investment went down because of the pandemic. So I think this is a nice representation. Does anybody have an idea how come that Luxembourg and the Netherlands are nominally the highest investors in Germany? Anyone? For the same reason as Singapore is the biggest investor in Indonesia. Those are so-called very tax beneficial jurisdictions. And foreign companies who come to Europe to structure their investment often looked into Luxembourg or the Netherlands to build a holding company, and from there onwards to structure operating companies in other markets, because there are many ways that you can structure the cash flows so that they pay the least tax possible in a jurisdiction like Luxembourg or the Netherlands. Typical other jurisdictions like that, Ireland, which you can see down there. I don't know if you've heard that, but Apple, Google, and Amazon, when they invest in Europe, they all invest via Ireland because they have beneficial tax arrangements with the Irish government. In Indonesia, you have the same phenomenon. So the Netherlands themselves actually don't invest as much in Indonesia as it looks. It's mostly American and European corporations going through the Netherlands to invest in Indonesia. But the biggest beneficial jurisdiction that investment flow through into Indonesia is Singapore. The main sectors in which foreigners invest in Germany, you can see here. Financial and insurance activities, of course. Then manufacturing. As you know, Germany is quite popular as a manufacturing hub because of the extremely highly qualified workforce. The other channels are pretty much the same as in other jurisdictions. Maybe one thing to point out, in Germany, we don't limit foreign ownership on real estate itself. So foreign corporations, such as same as foreign individuals, can purchase land in Germany and purchase the same kind of land titles that Germans can purchase. So how do countries attract investors? Or how do investors look at countries when they want to invest there? Maybe that's a better question. It's always the same thing, and I'm sure you've heard it before, and you will hear it 100 times after me. It's all about reliability and predictability, and it's not necessarily about the higher or lower tax rate. Investors just want to know that if they have a business plan for 10 or 15 years, they will still have the same conditions in 10 or 15 years. And for that, you need a stable, fast, and efficient legal system. You need transparent tax laws, and you need a high level of enforcement. Because the laws are no use to you if you only have a right on paper, but you can never get it because the police doesn't enforce it. Bureaucratic hurdles, in my personal opinion. So what I do every day is I accompany German investors in Indonesia. I help them incorporate companies, structure investments, but I also help them with all their everyday struggles, such as bureaucratic hurdles, compliance, and all that. And the hurdles actually can be super high as long as they're transparent. As long as you know what you have to do, you can prepare for it, and you know this happens every year, and we've done it last year, we can do it again. But if it changes every year or every 2 months, that makes your investment extremely difficult. You had a question? I just want to be so same goes for the protection of property rights. If I'm an investor, I put a lot of money in an investment in a company, in a country, I want to make sure nobody takes it away from me, or that nobody tries to, benefit off my investment without me noticing or wanting that. So again, we come back to the robust legal framework. Probably will also be part of our discussion later. As you can imagine, my clients struggle with that in Indonesia a lot of times because predictability and levels of enforcement here are not up to standard when you look at other countries. This is the last point is what I mentioned before. We don't limit ownership of land, quite the opposite to what's going on in Indonesia. And just to make that clear, I don't criticize that. Indonesia has a system that is very common in post-colonial countries, because if you've been through land grabbing by foreign oppressors, then you think twice about how you structure your land ownership rights. And the fact that in Indonesia, only individuals can own property in the form of hak milik is applied everywhere. It's not discriminatory to foreigners because no PT can buy land. Not just foreign PTs, it's just every PT cannot really be an owner. Dispute resolution, another topic that is very, very, very important in practice. Maybe just Andy is working with me on many of the cases that we work on. And when we negotiate contracts, alternative dispute resolution or dispute resolution in general is super important, because no investment always goes smoothly. You know you're going to run into trouble at some point. And for us, it's been a big plus, for example, when we have foreign companies that want to enter into contracts with BUMN here in Indonesia. As you may know, BUMN cannot lead to foreign dispute resolution, even not foreign arbitration. They have to use BANI. And since we work in a law firm that is very famous for litigation, and we have the expertise to explain to people that BANI does offer effective and up to par alternative dispute resolutions, we have been able to conclude more contracts with BUMN, because before, overseas law firms, when they see BANI, they don't know what it is, and they just see, oh, it's a court in Indonesia, and I can trust it. They need people like us or any other lawyer who is proficient in it to explain to them. Just because they haven't heard of it doesn't mean it doesn't work. So I think BANI and its increasing good reputation will be a huge factor for Indonesia, for example, to attract investment, because let's be honest, nobody wants to go to regular course in Indonesia. And BANI does propose an alternative that we have been able to sell in situations where they could not agree on any overseas dispute resolution. Investment incentives. I don't know if you've ever covered that before. Different governments or different jurisdictions have differing approaches to how to make them attractive to foreign investment. That includes tax breaks, tax holidays, tax reductions, but also cheap land, or support in terms of education of workforce. In Indonesia, there have been very, very few incentives in the past, but since the Omnibus Law, Indonesia has started picking up on that. So we're just now concluding, or we just had the groundbreaking ceremony for a factory in Kendal, where my client went to Kendal specifically to obtain a tax holiday as an incentive there. It works, especially in free trade zones in Indonesia. This works, and since I have this experience from Malaysia and Thailand have been doing this for more than 10 years. So if an investor comes to Indonesia, he finds a huge market with many opportunities. If an investor comes to Malaysia, he finds a huge market, and every Malaysian region will come and tell him that it's best to invest in their region. So there's competition among all Malaysian regions to make it as attractive as possible to an investor to go to their place. And I think what is happening right now, you can see that, there's two FTZs, two special industrial zones in Central Java, in Kendal and in Batang, and they really compete with each other. Like when someone approaches Kendal, Batang comes and says, our land is cheaper. And this sounds weird, but for an investor, this is highly attractive because they feel like they have not just opportunities, but choice. And I'm very happy that Indonesia is now among those countries start to be a magnet for investors and not a problem. We have that in Germany. Our incentives are highly limited because we don't believe in that anymore. We used to have that, of course, when it was still very much growing economy. Now there's industrial and very saturated. Tax incentives are rather small, but I don't know if anyone heard, but Elon Musk has built a factory near Berlin for Tesla cars. I'm sure he had a very nice tax deal for that with the local government. So when it's a big investment, even Germany is happy to provide incentives. Other than Indonesia, we don't have as many free trade zones. We have free trade zones mostly established at entrance ports. Hafen Cuxhaven, Deggendorf, Duisburg, and Hamburg all are seaports or river ports that just provide for the in and outflow of goods and therefore make sense as a free trade zone. Germany is part of the European single market. Does anyone know what that is? No idea? You know that there's a European Union comprised of, I keep losing track, but I think it's 27 or 28 member states right now, mostly continental Europe. It is often compared to what ASEAN is, although the two are extreme in where they want to go. So ASEAN wants to be a group of countries, of nations that govern their part of the globe mostly in harmony, but they very much want to remain sovereign. Whereas the EU is based on all the individual member states transferring sovereignty over certain topics to a supranational organization that is the EU. So countries let go of their right to govern certain parts of what's going on in their country to something that is led by a group of countries. It's quite revolutionary as a concept. It's working quite well. It poses many problems because at the end of the day, Germans are still Germans and French are still French and Italians are Italians. And they think differently, they have different cultures, and it's not always easy to harmonize things. So the whole thing is founded on specific treaties among all these member states. And I'm not going to go into the details, but technically you have to imagine the EU as a set of administrative bodies, mostly located in Brussels, and they, through parliamentary and executive regulations, have the opportunity or the right and possibility to govern Germany by two general means. Not Germany, but the EU with Germany in it. One is regulations. If the EU passes a regulation, it becomes effective law in all the member states at the same time immediately. When it issues a directive, that's something that compels each and every member state to change their laws to a certain effect, no matter how they do it. That way, with directives, you achieve that all the judicial traditions and systems and techniques can remain individual in each and every member state as long as they effectively achieve the same goal. It's very complicated in lawmaking, but it does work quite well. So we don't all have to use Dutch law, and we don't all have to use Italian law or some new EU artificial law. Everyone can stick to their judicial system and their regulatory techniques, as long as they make sure that the directive's goal is achieved in their set of rules. And in order to figure out whether those set of rules are in line with constitutions, or whether the rules that are made in countries effectively do comply with what the directive wants, we have a European Union court system that anyone can apply to think that their rights under European law are violated. And the whole thing is supposed to create one single market. So you have to, I mean, I think many of you may have heard of this so-called Schengen visa, where you get a visa for one European country and you can travel all of Europe with that one visa. That's something that comes out of this idea of a free and single market. Because within Europe, I, as a German, I can just go to Italy or France, Portugal or Spain, and nobody will even ask me for, except for check-in at the airline counter. We don't have border controls. I can pay with the same money almost everywhere. We have the euro, which is also an outflow of the European Union. And all of that is supposed to make sure that goods and services, but also capital and labor, can move freely throughout the European Union without cross-border tax applying, so that capital and labor and services can be allocated in those places where they can be most effectively used. So far, it's working out quite well, because the distribution of wealth throughout the European Union is probably not perfect, but it's something rather new. And by looking at how many countries are eager to join the club, you can see that it is working for almost everybody. This is probably one thing that I want to point out. It's extremely technical, and if you look into it, for me, it's highly boring, but it's absolutely crucial. Standards, in terms of technical standards, minimum standards for drugs, food, and so on, are extremely important for trade and investment. In ASEAN, we have the case that still every member state has their own system, right? There's SNI in Indonesia, for example, and BPOM here is giving all of my clients a headache. But the equivalent to BPOM in Thailand and Vietnam and Malaysia is also giving all of my clients a headache. What my client's problem is they have to BPOM and to the one in Vietnam and to the one in Thailand and everywhere, and you have everything certified everywhere again. Whereas in the EU, if you get your certified in one country, you can sell it in all of them, because we've harmonized the standard. So as an investor, let's say I'm thinking about bringing my product of ASEAN, the entry cost for that is extremely high, because these procedures with all these authorities, they take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money. If I can only do that one time, the cost of entry is much lower, and it makes it easier for me to access the market. In the EU, we have achieved that, but harmonizing these things is extremely difficult. So I'm glad it was already done in the past, and they're still working on that. And now, I'm sure you've heard the term Brexit. With someone leaving the EU for the first time, we're seeing in practice what happens if you leave the club and all of a sudden all those things don't work anymore. Investors are retreating from Britain since years, because they know that anything they make in Britain, they cannot no longer just sell freely over the EU. Car factories are closing. All German car manufacturers don't produce for the EU in Britain anymore. They may use the factory to produce for anywhere else in the world, but it was all structured in a different way. So it's going to be interesting how that turns out, because Britain had been fully harmonized. And now that doesn't count anymore, because even if you fulfill British standards, the EU doesn't recognize it anymore. And now to non-EU investments. So maybe why I put this chapter in here. Germany has to treat every investment from the European Union the same as German investment. That's part of the Treaty of the European Union. There are some exemptions for strategic industries such as weapons manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and so on. But in general, that's the case. Non-EU investment are a different thing. Non-EU investments in Germany, right now, the only big topic is China. Whenever China invests in Germany, everybody is frightened because they might invest in strategic things and they take our technology and all of that. So in German media, every day there's something about it. The question of who from outside the EU can invest in the country is not part of the sovereign rights that the member states have transferred to the European Union. That's why we have a nice German word called Außenwirtschaftsgesetz. It translates into the Foreign Investment Act, if you so will. So Germany is still at liberty to regulate investment from outside the EU into their country on their own. In that Außenwirtschaftsgesetz, we give the Federal Ministry of Economics the right to scrutinize investments into Germany from EU member states and to, in some cases, forbid it if we deem it non-beneficial to Germany. And we generally make a distinction between sector-specific and cross-sector investment. Sector-specific is what I just mentioned, military, pharmaceutical, or what you may call strategic sectors. And then there's cross-sector where it doesn't really touch the area of strategic, but it's still considered relevant to the German economy. So I don't know, have you talked about merger control before? No? Okay. So there are different ways countries look at mergers or acquisitions from a competition perspective. Usually in a country where those systems are still building up, you have a post-merger control structure. That's the case in Indonesia. So Indonesia, the regulatory body, the KPPU, is still collecting data on the effects of mergers. That's why when you buy a company or sell a company or you merge two companies in Indonesia, you only report that to the authorities after you've done it. And then the authority looks at it and usually they don't do anything about it, but they collect the data and analyze it. So at some point, somewhere in the future, Indonesia is going to switch. And then if the deal is big enough, you have to report it before you do it. And they will decide whether the effect of the deal has a negative effect on competition in Indonesia, yes or no. And if yes, they will usually have some conditions to it. Merger control has nothing to do with whether you're foreign or Indonesian. It only has to do with competition in the country. So foreign companies in Germany are not subject to higher scrutiny in terms of merger control than German companies because all they care about is whether the competition in the country still works or not. The foreign investment control on the B, that's what only applies to foreigners. So if I, as a German company, want to buy another German company, this doesn't apply. They can't scrutinize me and they cannot tell me what to do because it's still German. But if I'm a non-EU, let's say I'm a US company and I want to buy a certain German company, there are certain transactions that are subject to notification. And if they are, I have to notify the authorities and wait for their go-ahead to be able to do what I want to do. No higher standards, but in this case, they are. So regulated industries, pharmaceuticals, military, radioactive, and so on, there are special controls. And I mean, let's be honest, no country in the world would allow a foreign country to operate a weapons manufacturing site on their soil. That just doesn't work. In Indonesia, for example, if you want to make weapons and you want to be a foreign company, your maximum share is 49%. So it's absolutely sure that an Indonesian shareholder controls the company. And that's the same in Germany too. And everybody would be kind of, very ill-advised to do it otherwise. And when you generally can have a majority stake, so a foreign company can come and just buy a German company. There's no legal restrictions for that, except when that ministry says, wait, that's too much and too important. As you know, in Indonesia, since the omnibus law, we don't have so many restrictions anymore, but we still do have some. And for example, if a foreign company wants to buy a small Indonesian company with low paid-up capital, they can only do that if they increase the paid-up capital to a certain level, because that's the minimum paid-up capital for foreign investment. So whenever a non-EU company acquires 25% or more in a German company, they have to notify. And if it's infrastructure, they have to notify if it's 10% or more. And the go ahead or not is the possibility that the transaction is likely to impair public order or security. So I mean, public order is like where authorities can be creative, you know. So public order in Germany could be a Chinese investment into this company, makes it highly likely that German technology is transferred to China and no longer available to the German industry, for example. Or a very nice case, because it's even below the 10%, and it recently happened in my hometown of Hamburg. A Chinese company was investing in a terminal in Hamburg, and I think they were looking to acquire 4.9%. So not even 5%. And the Hamburg local government was very much to go ahead because, of course, China offered big money. And maybe to illustrate the relevance of these deals, Chinese ship owners are the biggest customers of the Hamburg port. The Hamburg port is the second biggest port in Europe. And without these Chinese ships docking at Hamburg port, the port would pretty much go broke in a couple of years. So the Chinese ships are operated by Chinese state-owned companies, and another Chinese state-owned company was looking to buy a part of that terminal. And of course, what they said was, you better sell us those 4.9%, or maybe we will send our ships somewhere else. And the Hamburg local government was scared because without the Chinese ships, no lucrative harbor anymore. The rest of Germany says, you're easy. If you give the Chinese 4.9% now, you give them 50% in 10 years. We've seen it before. And there was a huge discussion, even though the deal, as you can see, was not even subject to notification. They could just do that without telling anyone. It's too little of a stake. But with the fact that the Chinese could always say, maybe our ships will park somewhere else in the future, everybody knew that probably that stake is going to increase pretty fast. What happened is Hamburg sold this anyway, and we'll see how that turns out. But it was highly criticized, and the German government was actually contemplating on buying that stake at the same price, just to compensate Hamburg for not selling to China. And by that, you can see the relevance of these questions in Germany right now. So in order to make sure that the scrutiny ends, at the end of the assessment procedure, the investor receives a Unbedenklichkeitsbescheinigung, which is basically a certificate of non-risk, and then they can go ahead and purchase. I'm not going to the details of this, but whoever gets those slides and is really interested can look at the mechanisms of that law applying. So those on the left side are those sector-specific things where it's strategic, and you can see the threshold is 10%. And on the right side, it's a little more segmented because it depends on how big the company is, whether they're a technology company, and depending on the severity of the case, the scrutinizing process is different. Effective legal protections for investors, as I said before, for people who put a lot of money in a foreign country, that's mostly the important thing. They want to make sure that the money is protected and goes where it's supposed to go. So in general, Germany, I think since the 50s or 60s, right after it was built up after World War II, started signing bilateral investment treaties with almost every country in the world, including Indonesia, until Indonesia in 2017 decided to end that. That was not because Indonesia and Germany don't get along anymore. It was because Indonesia had a general agenda of ending all bilateral investment treaties in order to run multilateral investment programs instead. And I have to give it to Indonesia. Deals that were made between countries like Germany and countries like Indonesia in the 60s were, if you want to be radical, you can call them neo-colonialistic, but definitely they were not eye level. So I can understand the notion to have those ended and renegotiated. So currently there's no bilateral investment treaty, for example, between Germany and Indonesia, but all investments made under the investment treaty are still protected for 20 years. So this effectively only ends in 2037. Then there's a multilateral investment guarantee agency that compels countries that are members to guarantee to each other that they protect each other's investments. This is one of the things that Indonesia is going to rely on in the future. And Germany has a comparably very sophisticated jurisdiction and track record of cases in expropriation. So the German constitution and the relevant case law protects anyone from expropriation by the state. By anyone, that means all foreign investors. So if a foreign investor suffers expropriation or what we call expropriation-like effects, they can go to the German Constitutional Court and claim. They don't have to be German for that. And since all the German authorities know that, and they don't want to be taken to court, if ever an event occurs where people or companies are expropriated, they pay extremely high sums in compensation right up front because nobody wants to go to the Constitutional Court. So we rarely have that problem. Current challenges. This is going to be basically a summary of what I've said before. The highest challenge for German companies or the German regulators right now are to protect what Germany is famous for in the world. Germany is a manufacturing hub, an innovation hub. I mean, before the electric car revolution, most of the highest valued cars and technology products came from Germany. And behind industries like that is a lot more than just Mercedes-Benz or BMW or Volkswagen. If you imagine how many cars they produce in a year and how many small and medium-sized entities grow around these huge manufacturing giants to supply them with parts, wastewater treatment, whatever it is. There are regions in Germany who, if the local car manufacturing plant shuts down, not only the 10,000 people who work there, but also 70,000 people who work in the periphery of it. So if the car industry, for example, let's just stick to that. If the car industry in Germany dies, 1/3 of the German workforce is out of a job. So in order to protect the innovation and technology that is behind all those companies, of course, the German government must make sure that no one comes to Germany, buys the company, and the technology is gone, and the jobs appear somewhere else. Best example, I don't know if anyone has any called KUKA. It's a robotics company, very famous. They're shining orange robotics arms that are mostly used in car manufacturing. They have one very famous TV ad that you can look up on Google where the robotics arms is playing ping pong against the world champion in ping pong because it's just as fast. And that company was one of the flagships of German innovation in robotics. And then a Chinese company came and bought it, and nobody did anything against it. That was basically the start of this campaign to protect German companies more. Because now KUKA is a Chinese company. They happen to be a client of mine. I still speak to German people in the German legal department, but the owners are Chinese. And they tell me, we're not making any new factories in Germany, and research and development is now in China. So that is gone. Germany, for them, is just one of many production centers, but no longer the source of innovation. And if that happens all the time, then Germany is degrading from an industrial and innovative nation to a manufacturing hub. And based on that, I would be happy to receive your questions or challenges, whatever, to discuss. Very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Philip, for your explanations, outstanding explanations. Oke, silakan untuk adik-adik teman-teman mahasiswa yang tadi sudah mendengarkan, ada yang ingin ditanyakan atau ada hal yang sekiranya ingin dijelaskan lebih lanjut, silahkan ya ditanyakan. Mumpung ada ahlinya, ya, mumpung ada ahlinya. Atau jangan-jangan nggak paham ini yang dijelaskan ini oleh Mr. Philip. Paham tidak? Sedikit ya. Oke, yang belum paham di bagian mana nanti bisa dijelaskan kembali oleh Mr. Phillips. Ya. Sebenarnya menarik ya ketika kita tadi mendengar penjelasan Mr. Philip ya berkaitan dengan Germany Investment Law ya, karena memang kalau kita lihat Germany ini adalah salah satu negara yang memang maju, yang sudah banyak perusahaan-perusahaan multinasionalnya. Teman-teman pasti sering lah melihat produknya seperti tadi yang disampaikan, ada BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche, Audi, Leica, Siemens, and so on. That's the company that coming from the Germany. Yeah, it's mean that di situ ada investasi. Ya, di situ ada investasi asing termasuk Indonesia salah satunya dari perusahaan-perusahaan dari Jerman. Ya, dan kalau kita lihat juga secara peringkat ya, kalau kita lihat dari sisi data dari EOCD ya, dari apa namanya, ease of doing business, Jerman ini juga peringkatnya salah satu yang cukup tinggi ya dibandingkan dengan Indonesia. Indonesia itu masih di peringkat 73, around 73 ya. Jerman itu sudah around mungkin 20 atau 20 besar ya, 20 besar peringkat negara yang dirasa kemudahan berbisnisnya itu cukup baik ya. Jadi saya pikir saya juga mungkin ingin lebih tahu lebih dalam ya, karena Mr. Philipp have a lot of experience in Germany, in ASEAN country, and do you think that do you have any suggestions or maybe critique to our current regulations related to the investment? I mean to level up our rank in the context of the ease of doing business. Yeah, what do you think? You think that we need, what kind of the things that we need to fix in the context of the investment rules?
Yeah, I'll be happy to answer that. And please don't take any of this as criticism to Indonesia in general. I love it here. And as I said before, I have the honor of often going with EU or German business delegates to several ministries in Jakarta. And those are usually groups of people who are contemplating investment in Indonesia. And for these occasions, we pre-submit our questions. Actually, I'm supposed to pre-submit some for a delegation end of July. And my questions as a lawyer are always the same ones. It's come to the point where I go to BKPM or the Ministry of Trade, and they see me in the audience and see I have a question, they go like, oh, this guy again, same question as last year. And nothing changes, you know. So I would just mention a few topics. Indonesia could have many more incentives. And I think it's perfectly fine to make those incentives regional, to say, let's say, for example, if you want to, I think now the first time this is happening is there are specific incentives for investments in the new capital Nusantara. It's the first time that Indonesia says, if you invest there, you don't have to pay up 10 billion, or if you can invest there and be a so-called regional center, if you have holding structures, and we give you a tax break. I think Indonesia should do that much more to, you know, focus investment in specific areas, in specific regions of Indonesia, because it's a vast country, as you know, with many islands. And I think, for example, just because I know it, and I don't mean to compare Malaysia to Indonesia at all, I know what that means. But close to Kuala Lumpur, there's, on the way to Putrajaya, there's a town called Cyberjaya, where Malaysia said, here we want to have technology firms and firms that are in the tech business in general, internet unicorns, whatever. And whoever goes there pays, I think, no taxes for 10 years. They have high-speed internet activity for free. And I didn't believe it, but there were like 15, 20 German IT services companies who had huge operations there with hundreds of Malaysians working to support their services support for companies in Germany. They didn't even have customers in Malaysia, but they knew, I can find qualified Malaysian workers in Cyberjaya, have high-speed internet, I don't pay taxes. So instead of employing 100 Germans for millions of dollars, I can employ 100 Malaysians for roughly half and still provide the same service, and even have the upside of around-the-clock service, because it's easier to maintain a shift system with cheaper workers in Malaysia. But that meant 100 Malaysians had highly qualified work, just because they made the opportunity there for these companies to come. And as I said, Kendal is an example for Batang, where this happens now, but it's way too little. I don't know if anyone has ever been to the Kendal Industrial Park, but it's a huge area, and there are spots of factories now. I hope that's going to improve, but this takes too long. And other countries such as Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia are faster, and they promise more. So I think Indonesia should be much bolder and say, no, I don't want you to invest in Malaysia. I don't want you to invest in Vietnam. I want you to come here and you tell me what I need to do. And I think it's changing. Like BKPM used to be almost an investment avoidance agency, and now it's really trying to, to help. It's not good enough yet, but you can see the perspective is slowly changing. And yeah, we discussed it before. Many of you may know, if you want to make a PT PMA in Indonesia, your minimum paid up capital is 10 billion rupiah, which is roughly 600,000 euros. That's a lot of money. And if you're planning to make a factory, that's no money at all. And everybody's going to spend it anyway, right? But my best counter example is if you're a freight forwarding company and you want to have 10 salespeople and 8 accountants in Indonesia, and they all just need desks and computers, 600,000 euros is a lot of money and you don't need it. And it's hard to convince a German, Swiss, or Austrian CFO to put 600,000 euros in a country like Indonesia when you know you don't need it. So then they rather don't invest in Indonesia and they invest somewhere else where they don't need that much money. And I think it's key because those people who want to spend a lot of money will still come. But if you lower those thresholds, the people that don't want to spend as much money yet will also come. So I think I'm German. I have the same perspective. I think whatever you want to invest in my country, just come invest it. What I have to say is good about Indonesia, and I just had that discussion with my boss in Singapore. As you may know, in Singapore and Malaysia, even foreigners can incorporate a company with a paid up capital of $2 or $1. I don't even know. And nothing, right? So instead of buying a burger at McDonald's, you just make a company. And that's too little. That's also an approach that we have in Germany. In Germany, you need 25,000 euros in capital. Because I strongly believe that if you incorporate a limited liability company, there must be some level of trust that there's something behind it. And if there's no investment or an investment of $2 Singapore, why would I trust the company? I think there's a fine line to work too much or too little. But the discussion that I had with my boss was more on our client structure. And he said, we're starting to filter out all the clients that don't actually make money and they don't even make enough to pay us and so on. And you should do the same thing in Indonesia too. And I said, well, thank you for caring about it, but I don't have clients like that. Because my clients have to invest so much money in the Indonesian companies, they would be stupid not to operate and not to pay me from it, because every client that I have is a legitimate, fully operating company, because nobody just puts $600,000 somewhere and then does nothing with it. So there's a positive effect that make sure that you only get serious investment, but there's a negative effect that serious investment at a lower threshold doesn't come. So I think there's a lot to be done there.
Oke, jadi menurut penjelasan Mr. Philipp bahwa salah satu hambatan lah ketika berinvestasi di Indonesia itu salah satunya adalah kurangnya insentif ya. Jadi memang mungkin dibandingkan dengan negara-negara lain ya, insentif yang diberikan khususnya terhadap foreign direct investment ya, terhadap investasi asing itu masih relatif belum terlalu banyak ya. Jadi memang secara mungkin dari sisi kesempatan ekonomi atau economic opportunity itu kurang atraktif ya, kurang menarik ya dibandingkan dengan negara-negara lain, misalnya seperti di Malaysia. Tadi disampaikan di Malaysia itu ada tempat khusus ya tadi yang memang di situ disediakan untuk investor-investor yang mau melakukan penanaman modal di bidang teknologi, di bidang IT, dan tadi provide high speed internet and so on ya. Jadi memang dari sisi insentif mungkin kita masih kurang ya. Jadi mungkin Opung Luhut ini kurang kasih ini ya, banyak insentif ya. And then tadi juga disebutkan bahwa terkait dengan hambatan dari sisi regulasi ya. Tadi saya sempat diskusi juga dengan Mr. Philips ya, bahwa ada aturan di BKPM itu yang mensyaratkan bahwa penanaman modal asing atau PMA itu PT-nya harus minimal modal dasarnya 10 miliar sekarang. Dinaikkan dulu awalnya hanya 2,5, 2.5, dia naik hingga 10. Itu berapa kali lipat itu? 4 kali lipat, 4 times ya. So I think it is will be as the obstacle ya, jadi penghambat ya, karena tadi sekarang ketika ada perusahaan asing investasinya itu adalah di sektor teknologi, mungkin hanya butuh laptop, butuh komputer, tidak butuh pabrik yang besar gitu kan. Buat apa uang 10 miliar harus disetor ke perusahaan, ke rekening perusahaan dan itu tidak digunakan. Jadi memang itu salah satu tadi ya di dalam apa namanya hambatan-hambatan lah terkait dengan atau kekurangan-kekurangan yang itu terdapat di Indonesia, yang artinya itu sebenarnya harus diperbaiki agar Indonesia ini bisa bersaing ya dengan negara-negara ASEAN lain di dalam memperebutkan investasi dari Eropa, dari Amerika, dari China ya. Karena kita sekarang secara head to head kita harus berkompetisi gitu kan dengan Thailand ya. Thailand, Malaysia, I think they have more faster in the context of the growing of the foreign investment daripada di Indonesia. Ya, mungkin itu yang tadi disampaikan oleh Mr. Philips ya. Oke, masih ada yang mau ditanyakan dari adik-adik yang lain? Ada yang belum jelas? Ada? Jangan malu-malu. Ya. Kalau nggak bisa bahasa Inggris nanti saya translate, ya, translator. Ya, silakan. Ada nggak? Ya. Namanya dulu. Namanya siapa? Oke, Muhammad Ridho. Gimana pertanyaannya, Mas Ridho? Okay, so from Mr. Rido, he asking about, is there any difference about the European single market with ASEAN economic community in ASEAN? Is there any difference?
There are some small differences, but I think currently the main difference is that the European single market already exists and the ASEAN economic community is still working towards it. So for the European single market, only tiny portions of sovereignty have to be transferred to the EU. Most of it is treaties, such as standardization, stop of border controls, and so on. But especially in terms of customs controls and harmonization of standards, ASEAN, I know the ASEAN economic community wants to come to be there at some point, but it's still far from there. So if we imagine that the ASEAN economic community were already at the point where they want to be, the difference would still be there, but not so relevant. Because what the ASEAN economic community wants to do is, if I produce a product in, let's say, Thailand, I should be able to ship it to Indonesia with no tariff. For that, I need a COO, a certificate of origin, certifies that this product was all of it or most of it was made in ASEAN. Because the economic idea is, if it's made in ASEAN, it should not be expensive to trade it in ASEAN. Because when we achieve that, same as we have already achieved it in the EU, people will make what makes sense to be made in Thailand, and they will make what makes sense to make in Indonesia. And if the question of where I make it depends on where I want to ship it, nobody invests. So if I can ship it anywhere, no matter where I make it, I'll make it where it's most effective. Let's say I want to make car batteries, right? The hot topic here right now. Why would anyone make car batteries in Thailand and ship the nickel for it from Indonesia? If the batteries they make in Indonesia can be shipped to Thailand without tariffs, right? That's a good example because Thailand has most of the automotive manufacturing in Southeast Asia. So I'm an automotive manufacturer, and I build all my cars in Thailand, and I'm switching to electric vehicles. And for that, I need nickel that I can only find close by in Indonesia. Then do I bring all car manufacturing to Indonesia just because Indonesia has nickel? Probably not. Do I build a nickel processing plant in Thailand to process my nickel from Indonesia and Thailand? Maybe also not. But do I make a nickel processing factory in Indonesia because the nickel I process in Indonesia and make into batteries in Indonesia can flow to Thailand with only transportation costs and not customs, excise, import VAT, and all these things? Then that is easy. I'll just put a facility where it's economically most effective. So every country also benefits from its resources because Indonesia has nickel. Thailand already has an educated workforce in automotives. So making the cars makes sense where people can make cars, and making the batteries makes sense where you have the raw materials for the batteries. And if that works, if it's totally harmonized and tariff-free, it's good for everyone. But right now we're at the stages where it doesn't work everywhere the same. And that's why it seems like it's never getting there. But it was the same in the EU. So it's a long process. I would expect that the process will be longer because most of the ASEAN member states are still considered developing countries, whereas most of the EU member states, when they decided to harmonize, were already industrialized. But the aim is technically the thing.
Oke, sudah dijawab ya tadi oleh Mr. Philips ya, bahwa memang kalau dirinya apakah ada perbedaan ya antara European Union dengan ASEAN Economic Community, memang terdapat ya, masih jauh kalau harus dibandingkan ya, karena memang kalau di European Union tadi disampaikan oleh Mr. Philips, di situ sudah sangat komprehensif ya, mulai dari adanya single market, kemudian adanya single policy terkait dengan harmonisasi regulasi, standarisasi produk dan lain sebagainya. Kalau di ASEAN kan belum ya, ASEAN masih sebatas ya adanya multilateral agreement, tapi belum sampai ke single economic, ke single currency, single policy, kita belum. Kita masih berpegang pada kedaulatan negara masing-masing ya, mengatur regulasi-regulasi berkaitan dengan investasi, berkaitan dengan kebijakan bea masuk dan segala macamnya. Jadi itu tadi sudah dijawab oleh Mr. Philips ya. Sudah jelas Mas Rido? Sudah ya. Ada lagi yang lain, silakan kalau ingin ditanyakan. Welcome. Yeah, he is one of our foreign lecture.
Yes, we've met last night.
Oh, I think this is your first meeting. Oke, masih ada pertanyaan lain dari teman-teman yang belum jelas? Ayo, jangan malu bertanya. Okay, but if we see about the trend today, about how the treaty work in the context of the investment, the trend is mostly the country is more prefer to use the multinational, multilateral treaty rather than the bilateral, bilateral investment of treaty. You are mentioning that the BITS between the Indonesians and the Germany already exhausted in 2007, and we move to the multilateral agreement. Is there any what we call beside of the multilateral investment guarantee agreement? Because I know that Germany is the member, Indonesia also the member, but I think is there any other multilateral agreement between Indonesia and Germany that it is can support the investment between Indonesia and Germany?
Well, there's actually one very big one in negotiation right now. The EU-Indonesia CEPA. Okay. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's negotiation round 12 or something, which already shows you that it has taken way too long. There's a huge issue between the EU and Indonesia, unfortunately, which makes it difficult to close it, and that's palm. Indonesia is under the perception that EU doesn't want to import Indonesian palm oil anymore, which is maybe just to set that straight, is not the case. But the EU has clearly stipulated that Indonesian and Malaysian palm oil will not be used or will not be certified as proper biofuel additive in EU because it's not sustainable. As you know, most of the areas where it's grown are for former rainforests, and Malaysia and Indonesia have two issues with that. First of all, I think the communication of that rule from the EU is not ideal, to say the least. It should have been communicated way more proactively, that for every other use, the palm oil is welcome in food, cosmetics, and everywhere. And on the other hand, and there I see a point, is that some other crop oils from other countries in the world that also grow on non-sustainable areas are allowed as biofuel. So there are some areas in South America where soy oil can be used. And the standpoint of Indonesia and Malaysia is just because we were later to burn down our rainforests, or so to speak, why are we not sustainable, but they are just because they did it earlier. And that's an argument I think everybody can relate to. And the last delegations I've been with, the coming one that I'm going on is also from the EU. Last time we even had the opportunity to meet Pak Jokowi, the president, and this was the main topic. And he pretty clearly said, as long as we don't resolve palm oil, there will not be a CEPA. I think the CEPA would be extremely beneficial to the EU and Indonesia, both of them. And also the fact that you see how many negotiation rounds we've had, you can see how hard both countries work on it. But so far it's not happened yet. I disagree with the general reliance of Indonesia on only multilateral investment protection, because there's no harm in having bilateral ones and multilateral ones.
Yeah.
What we have sometimes when we structure bigger investments into Indonesia is that when people want to invest to the tune of billions of dollars into a country, investment protection is a big issue. And they ask, is there an investment treaty? Can I go to ICSID if Indonesia fails to protect my investment? And if we say no, they think about doing things like structuring the investment via ASEAN country in order to have the treaty protection. We call that treaty shopping. And I think that should not be the case, because that means that money and energy is burnt in a place somewhere in ASEAN where it doesn't belong, because it's irrelevant for the objective. So I would think that it's the reason for terminating all bilateral investment treaties in 2017 was totally legitimate. They were way too old and outdated, and they were not eye level. But I think the right measure would have been to negotiate new ones right away, and not to wait for multilateral ones to appear sometime.
Oke, thank you. Jadi ada informasi dari Mr. Philip bahwa memang saat ini sedang ada negosiasi ya berkaitan dengan EU CEPA, berkaitan dengan palm oil ya, dengan biofuel. Nah itu sedang dalam proses negotiate ya. Hopefully bisa realize ya, bisa terrealisasi dan bisa memberikan keuntungan baik itu bagi pemerintah Indonesia ataupun Germany ataupun European Union secara lebih luas. Nah, I think masih ada lagi pertanyaan yang lain. Oke, namanya Mas Dika. Ya. Ya.
Itu mungkin itu aja, Pak.
Okay, so the questions from Mas Dika ya, Mr. Dika is related to how far the impact of the political factor ya, political stability, because Indonesia in 2024 we have the change of our presidents. Yeah, so do you how in Germany it is have also interfere? I'm like have the interfere the investment climate or something like that.
Of course, changes of power always do something to investment. I think we cannot avoid that. In Germany, that is mostly insignificant because it has long-standing democratic tradition. The parliament is fragmentized, and it's mostly a coalition-based government, such as we have in Indonesia right now. And the general direction of politics, whether it's the center-right or the center-left dominating the government, doesn't really change. I mean, right now we even have an economics minister who belongs to the Green Party that was long presumed as having a tendency towards socialism, and he's doing a fantastic job and not doing anything socialist or anti-economic at all. So I think I know what you're aiming at with the question, because we have that all the time in practice. People come to us and says, well, my Indonesian business partner says we should invest now because after the president changes, he cannot guarantee it's going to be fine. Or they come and say, everybody tells me to do it after the government changes, so we know what we're working with. My personal opinion, I think since the fall of the Suharto regime in the late 90s, Indonesia has only had peaceful power transitions, and the general direction of the country has never significantly changed. So I would actually hope that it's about time that also the investment community recognizes that it's highly unlikely that Indonesia will be a completely different country after the next election. Of course, the direction changes, and from my personal opinion, the heavy investment in infrastructure was a wise move by President Jokowi. Maybe there's another incentive by another government, could be positive, could be negative, but generally Indonesia is not going to shut its doors to foreign investment just because we have a new president. I don't think so. And I don't think the investment community should think so and just go ahead and plan it.
Oke, jadi kalau saya menangkap apa yang dijelaskan ya oleh Mr. Phillips, bahwa sebenarnya memang political stability ini salah satu faktor ya untuk bisa menentukan atau bisa determinan faktor apakah investor asing itu mau melakukan investasi atau tidak ya. Tetapi key point-nya adalah terletak pada siapapun presidennya, artinya yang penting secara political stability, secara kestabilan politik itu tetap terjaga, artinya itu tidak akan terlalu berdampak besar ya. Kecuali kalau sampai mungkin ya terjadi presiden sampai 3 periode kemudian ada chaos, nah mungkin itu nanti dampaknya akan besar ya terhadap stabilitas politik, dan tentunya nanti investor asing juga akan berpikir 2 kali mungkin ketika akan melakukan investasi yang dalam jumlah besar ketika stabilitas politik di negara penerima modal atau host country-nya sedang tidak baik-baik saja gitu kan. Tapi hopefully harusnya nanti pemilu ya diselesaikan sesuai dengan konstitusi secara baik, artinya nanti ya secara political stability akan bisa smooth dan tidak berdampak terlalu besar ya terhadap investasi asing khususnya ya. Oke, masih pertanyaan atau ada yang belum jelas mungkin bisa langsung ditanyakan ke Mr. Phillips. Ya, silakan. Namanya? Oke. Oke.
So is there any solution from the government regarding this problem, or have there been preparations regarding the draft legislation regarding this matter, or what other solution have been prepared? Because I think as long as this investment is carried out, this transfer of technology still continues.
Thank you. Very good question. So what we have right now is what I presented before, the Außenwirtschaftsgesetz. I'm going to just go over. Can I go back? Yeah. This one. So those are the only measures in place right now. We don't have a situation where the Ministry of Economics can just say, no, you don't get that company. Because what also can happen, right? Let's go to the far right. Where those are just regular companies, non-strategic, but very innovative. Even if the ministry forbids the Chinese or whatever non-EU company to buy it, that only means they cannot buy 25 or more %. They will just buy 24.9, and they will still make an investment. We can't change that. And the core of your question is to avoid that at all costs, right? Because as I just said, technology and innovation are the core of any economy, but especially in Germany. And that's maybe all comes down to the perspective change that probably takes place here at some point. The general perspective on investment in Germany is absolutely 100% different than here, because German companies invest overseas much more than foreign companies invest in Germany. So if we expect foreign markets to be good hosts to our investment, we cannot be too restrictive at home. It just doesn't work that way, you know. So if we allow foreign companies to buy shares in our companies, if we don't allow them to buy land, how can we complain about not being able to buy land, for example, in Indonesia, right? They just say, well, just look at yourself. You don't allow me to buy land. Why would I allow it to you? So Germany has the approach of saying, we open up everything because we're part of the European single market. We're in a tradition of no borders and free investment flows for everyone. And we want to stick as close to that tradition as possible while, you know, trying the fine line of where do I protect my economy and where am I open enough for investment. I'm not sure this is perfect. And the only changes that are discussed is, do we, you know, regulate that by upping the percentage or lowering the percentage? But the general approach is that this mechanism is good enough, and we just have to adjust it to what's going on. But the core of your question is, how do you look at foreign investment? Is it generally something that I want at all costs? Or is it something that I actually wish I wouldn't need? And in Germany, it's something that we definitely want. In Indonesia, my clients often have the impression it's allowed with extremely high barriers because it's somehow necessary, but nobody really wants it, you know? And economically, there's much more to it that I don't even understand because I didn't study that. But it will, over time, extremely reduce the competitiveness of Indonesian companies on the international market and not benefit the economy as a whole. So I personally would hope that Indonesia, and I think they're on the way there, those guys in BKPM and in Pak Luhut's ministry, they're very progressive. And I think they are on the way there. But sometimes, just sometimes, measures in Indonesia are communicated in a way that makes the entire world, just freeze and think for a moment. And for example, that could be the new Hukum Pidana that was extremely critically reviewed. Or, for example, that was a measure by Pak Luhut. During the pandemic, he, I don't know if anyone heard of this, but during the pandemic, it was forbidden to distribute foreign manufactured medical devices in the, what's it called again? The online system for state-owned enterprises.
Marketplace?
No, it's not the marketplace. The e-catalog.
Oh, e-catalog.
Yeah. So the e-catalog was closed for every foreign manufactured medical device, including ventilators, right? So I have a German client. The company's name is Dräger. They had just imported, I think, 1,000 ventilators to Indonesia, and they could only sell them to private hospitals because the e-catalog wouldn't take them anymore. And that's a disaster. And these measures, like 2 weeks later, I had 5 requests from, I don't know how many industrial associations for medical device manufacturers in Germany who, we want someone to brief us on the situation in Indonesia. Why do they not want our stuff anymore? It's just, since these things happen too much ad hoc and in the spur of a moment, and that's exactly coming back to my very first slides, all investors want is absolute reliability. And if these things just happen spontaneously, they just, they become more and more careful with these countries because they don't know if tomorrow is still the same market that they had yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh, follow on that question. What is there, because there's no bilateral investment in place, is there mechanism for indirect appropriation?
Yeah.
How would that, other than just not investing in it,
yeah.
What body?
Yeah, well, under the bilaterals that still continue to offer protection for the sundown period, it's ICSID. And I'm not familiar with the international guarantee treaty system, but it should be ICSID as well, I guess. Most of them refer to it. And the EU SIPA in its current draft also refers to ICSID. So at the end of the day, they all point that direction. But as I said, larger investments do always contemplate going, for example, via Singapore or via Malaysia or whatever, to make sure the investment is recognized as ASEAN internal investment, to then have protection for the operational part in Indonesia. And that's a pity, because in order to not be considered a treaty shopper and to be an actual ASEAN investment, you must have considerable interest in that country. That means you often employ 10 people for 10, 20 years and doing nothing. They're just having the purpose of having something going on somewhere in ASEAN, so you're protected in Indonesia. And that can't be the goal here.
Sino? Oke, masih ada pertanyaan lagi? Silahkan. You still have 10 minutes. Ya, yeah. Jika masih ada pertanyaan lagi, silahkan. Kita masih ada 10 menit lagi. Ya, jadi sudah cukup banyak ya pertanyaan disampaikan. Alhamdulillah teman-teman adik-adik mahasiswa cukup antusias ya mendengarkan penjelasan dari Mr. Philip berkaitan dengan investasi ya, khususnya berkaitan dengan hukum di Jerman. Dan saya rasa tadi banyak sekali hal-hal baru yang juga saya baru mendengar dari dari Mr. Phillips. Tentunya apa yang sudah disampaikan oleh Mr. Philip tadi akan bermanfaat untuk adik-adik mahasiswa, juga saya tentunya sebagai pengajar hukum investasi. Saya rasa kita bisa cukupkan. Terima kasih. Thank you so much, Mr. Philip, for all of the explanations, that great presentations.
My pleasure.
And thank you also for the student who already submit the questions. Yeah, that was a good response. And kita akan tutup ya sesi kuliah guest lecture dari Mr. Philip Wesling dengan bacaan hamdalah. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kita pelan.